All right, good morning. My name is Lance Lidikin. I'm the Deputy Program Manager for the Joint Transportation Management System, working at US Transcom in the Acquisition Directorate. I've got with me here today Mr. Randall Young. He's the Chief of our Systems Engineering and Test Branch. And we're going to provide an overview of the Joint Transportation Management System program that we're working on for the Department of Defense. And then Randall's going to come in and he's going to have a bit of a dialogue in terms of some of the technical capabilities that we're looking at industry to provide some clarity to in the proposals that we expect to be coming here in the next couple of months. So with that being said, for those of you, I'm sure you probably know who US Transcom is, but we are a four-star combatant command which conduct globally integrated mobility operations on the Joint Deployment and Distribution Enterprise, right? And we'll talk a little bit about what the Joint Deployment and Distribution Enterprise is here in a couple slides. But again, you can see the four priorities of our Commander, General Van Ovost, ready now and in the future. She's all about warfighter readiness. That's the cornerstone of the command, as well as the driving cyber domain mission assurance. So we understand the adversaries are ever evolving, so we need to evolve with them. Advanced decision-making, enabling advanced decision-making. There's a lot of data within the Joint Deployment and Distribution Enterprise, so how can we use that to our advantage to make strategic decisions going forward? And then again, it's all about the people, empowering a competitive warfighting team. So she's very in tune with trying to get those folks up to speed. All right, so JTMS at a glance, just a quick background of the program. We're a Department of Defense reform initiative being led out of US Transcom, but again, we are doing this on behalf of OSD. Our milestone decision authority is Honorable LaPlante, the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. You may have heard Honorable Lohman speak yesterday virtually. He is our key functional sponsor, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Sustainment, and those two are really driving this with General Van Ovost kind of being the executive agent for the program. The problem statement, it's all about tying together the stovepiped legacy data transactions in the transportation execution systems with the financial management systems. Today, there's hundreds of disparate IT systems. I think Honorable Lohman mentioned around 400 logistics IT systems in the current legacy portfolio, and we're really trying to consolidate and look to where we can gain some efficiencies with that portfolio moving forward. The scope I will cover here in a future slide, so I don't need to get into that, but I will say what is out of scope, and that's aerial refueling, patient movements, and household goods. There's a whole other separate contract for household goods, which you may likely be aware of. And then the user impact is about we're anticipating about 36,000 users across the services and agencies within the Joint Deployment and Distribution Enterprise, and roughly 1,300 locations that we're going to have to deploy the software out to. And then again, the mission statement, the vision statement, I won't read it, but it's all about improving in-transit visibility, enabling auditability by stitching together those financial and transportation transactions. Okay, the JDDE, it's an end-to-end framework. It's focused on really four lines of business. CONUS Freight, it's the component of the JDDE that moves things via truck, rail within the continental United States. Then at the strategic ports, aerial and water ports, we have really where Transcom comes into play in terms of the Transportation Working Capital Fund. And then obviously the services and the theater network where they're moving things once it gets to the port of debarkation. And then the foundations of business reform. So the program actually goes back all the way to around the 2014 timeframe when OSD stood up the Transportation Financial Auditability Working Group. They identified several auditability gaps, and you can see some of the ones on the left here. I'm not going to go over all of them. It says proof of services rendered, timely and accurate transaction processing, which is really one of the keys for the auditability, funds control, audit, and some other things, right? And it's really about closing those auditability gaps while enabling transportation efficiencies across the JDDE. And then the lines of operation here, they fall within the four lines of business I talked to before, which was CONUS Freight, Strategic Airlift, Strategic Sea Lift, and OCONUS Freight. There's 86 lines of operation that fall beneath those lines of business that the JTMS has defined within the scope of the program. And then again, the vision statement, I don't need to read it. As you can see, it's all about integrating the transportation and financial processes, improving in-transit visibility, funds control, and providing a competitive advantage to the warfighter. Okay, the approach that we're taking to roll out the JTMS is a very methodical approach. We're defining the as-is architecture using a contract vehicle we have now across the 4 lines of business, mapping out all of those lines of operation that I had shown before. We have engagements weekly with all of the services, DLA, DFAS, and DCMA. Our program manager refers to them as affectionately as the Great Eight. But they do participate in conversations with us, and we've already built out about 500 individual process maps and have identified about 3,500 findings thus far in the as-is mapping process. After the as-is process mapping, we do have solution-agnostic BPR. We issued a task order contract for that as well. So really that's taking a look at the work that the as-is folks have uncovered, and then taking a solution-agnostic, not a specific ERP solution, but really, hey, what can we do from a .mil-PF and other changes that we can make to enable auditability and improve logistics efficiencies before we know what the actual material solution is going to be, which will be provided as recommended by the winner of the solution implementation contract. And then, again, cement the business performed through the solution design. That will be a part of the implementation contract, which we'll talk about a little bit. And then the configuration, the task fielding, and then sustaining the capability. And again, I think most of you are probably familiar with the challenges that that the department has had in implementing ERP solutions. So we are taking advantage of the lessons learned from those past ERP failures and successes. We actually had the Navy PEO at Scott Air Force Base the week before last, sharing lessons learned on their Navy ERP modernization effort. We've got DLA, who is also engaging in a modernization effort, coming out at the end of the month as well. So we're having a lot of conversations with those folks to really bounce things against them and try and avoid any pitfalls that they have identified through their efforts. And again, right, data, architecture, governance, and change management, I will hit on that one as well. That was one of the main reasons Navy came out. We have a pretty robust change management program within the JTMS program. It's actually why we're here today. It's really just kind of sharing the message of what JTMS is with the folks at the conference. Anytime we have a chance to get out and brief, we have a booth downstairs as well, which I'll talk about, and you guys can stop by and ask any questions after the briefing as well. So that was one of the root causes identified with a lot of the previous efforts with ERPs, is there was poor change management, so we're trying to get out ahead of that as we're early in the process. Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to pass it over now to Mr. Randall Young. He's going to talk to you about some of the technical areas of interest that the program is looking to receive industry feedback on as we move closer to the release of the solicitation. So, Randall, over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to stand a little farther back because I know I will hit this microphone every second otherwise. So really, I think what's exciting about coming on a new program, right, is that you get to start from scratch. And so not to say that the government or the Department of Defense has ever done something before poorly, right, with relation to IT, but if you guys would try to imagine that scenario, right, this is an opportunity to learn and not do that again, right? So how do we take advantage of that, and what things are we considering? And I'll just say as well that really the goal is to have a conversation. So folks in the audience, certainly if you have any questions, I would love to be interrupted at basically any point, right? So the first thing we could talk about is cloud provisioning strategies, right? If we're focusing on an ERP platform with other ancillary products, what is the strategy that we can use to identify the optimal cloud host for our environment? And as you can see here, part of our functional requirements do include the IL5 service, and really from there a combination of IaaS and SaaS type capabilities, right? You can see what we've been researching to date, right? The DISA Joint Warfighting Cloud capability, right? This is a big contract. It was awarded in the end of 2022, right? Literally 3 weeks after I got hired, right, on this job. So initially, was I considering it? No, didn't even know what the acronym stood for. But there's a lot of capabilities that are inherent with that, and it's something that, as they mature, and as Mr. Lidekin said, we're getting close to that acquisition timeline, so they're maturing as we're going to be receiving proposals. How do we how do we expect vendors to consider offering services either through those contracts or outside of those contracts. Second thing here I have listed, we've got identified that different software solutions also have different operating models, frankly, different licensing models. And so are there different models that may have a higher upfront cost but offer us a greater ability to be flexible in the future, lower our sustainment costs, and on the opposite side of that coin, if we buy all into all SaaS all the time, all perpetual license, right? Certainly we gain some things, but where is that trade-off and that break even? Go on to the next slide. So, all right, so once we've got that cloud platform selected, right, the next thing I think that we're going to need to do is actually start integrating with legacy systems. And I use the word integration really loosely in this case. As Mr. Littkin alluded to, right, there are going to be literally hundreds of legacy systems across the transportation enterprise that have some part to play in our modernization effort, right? And so for some of those products, the result could be like a full deprecation of their legacy features, and for other solutions, right, we might only see 40 or 50%, and that's going to drive different requirements for different types of integrations, right? Is it an API call? Is it a data feed from some static source? Are we ignoring the feed entirely and going around and trying to find the authoritative record? Or in some cases, if a system is going to be deprecated, do they need a future place to land for all of their legacy transactional information, right? And so, one of the things that we're considering right now is, again, database, right? Almost every piece of software that manages a whole bunch of information has a database that underpins it, right? ERPs, search tools, etc. But does it make sense for us to try to field an architecture that actually has a separate database, a data processing unit that can identify and compare, is my transaction ID coming in the same from the person who created it and the person who signed for that form, right, who signed that invoice? Do I want to do that separately from my ERP, giving me an additional potentially opportunity to cleanse or manipulate that data before it feeds into our system of record, right? That's the sort of thing that we're looking at. How is the flow going to be within that system, right? And frankly, right, so as people are probably seeing already here on slide 2, we don't have all the answers, right? And so to be clear, this is really us coming out in the beginning of a deployment. That's why I'm walking around the booth. I've seen, I think, some of you folks already as I've been walking around. We're trying to learn what options we have and what might be a solution for this in terms of the actual technical execution, and also, if we're making the right thoughts in our intermediate process. So moving on to data standardization and cleansing, right? Again, this is a big topic. I'll tell you, we've had many engagements with industry thanks to our contracting team. And what I noticed in some of the initial discussions was that, the opinion we got was, hey, you guys totally need to fix all that bad data before you send it to the new system, because obviously that bad data is bad. Well, copy, right? We got that. But with 300 systems that play, legacy program offices, people running different systems, we are not going to have that ability to simply go and tell people, fix that problem for us, right? And certainly if there's a chance of deprecation, right, they're not going to be necessarily a willing participant in that regardless, right? So as we look at that data cleansing requirement, right, this is where I think automation is going to come into play. I'm pushing a lot of people down on the floor to talk about machine learning, artificial intelligence, right? So if, one thing we see a lot of times is that a commercial carrier won't know the transportation control number of a transaction or something. They don't care, right? They put it on their truck and they drive it where we tell them to drive it, and then they drop it off. So, does that take artificial intelligence to figure out that my UIC is, FST 395 or whatever, and a person typed in 0? Like, I don't think that really rises to that level of needing the artificial intelligence, but that's also one of the, I think, greatest opportunities to research and learn from industry, right? You know, what kind of data sets do we have? How can we cleanse that data? And of course, right, as I've got here at the end, right, if I'm fixing bad data of a system, should I offer that back to them in return? Should I be considering whether or not we can function in that way? So from there, obviously, right, so now we're again trying to tell a story about integrating these systems, standardizing that data, figuring out, you know, what in the greatest likelihood, you know, for the Department of Defense Transportation Command, what is probably true, right? And now I think that will enable analytics, knock on wood, right, that we haven't had access to before. So everyone in this room, or many people in this room, are probably familiar with the Department of Defense in general. They've got efforts to consolidate and use big data platforms. Advana is one of those data platforms, and Transportation Command uses their Pegasus instance of that Advana cloud, but closer. Okay, sorry. I'm going to step closer. Okay. And so the Pegasus data platform is also maturing as we are going through our process, and what we are finding is that initially it was designed to be a repository and an analytic platform where we might be able to detect errors in data and get a great report that tells us problems that we're having. Well, that doesn't meet our requirement at all, right? So we need that cleansed data to be back out into production. And I know that there's current efforts ongoing with the Pegasus effort to do that right back. Transcom themselves are doing pilots of that, but really as we approach our contracting phase, it's going to be a challenge where is that capability mature enough that we can leverage it, or do we end up deploying if the capability of getting the data back out isn't mature enough and we have to develop our own capability, then for my opinion, you know, that's fine. However, again, as that platform continues to mature and our other solution would continue to mature, certainly you can see that there would be significant parallels, and that's one of the things that we're considering as well. On to the next slide. I'm sorry about the microphone feedback. Again, so we touched on this a little bit already, but you know, automation, machine learning, artificial intelligence, I kind of view that as a tiered process, right? So the Joint Transportation Management System requirements certainly say that we need to be able to leverage that for specific purposes, but you know, in a large program of record, what does the deployment of these technologies actually look like? You know, as we've discussed, Advana might not be able to do it, but we're combining 300 systems, right? So at a basic level, automation, are there going to be opportunities once we combine two separate systems where someone was copying and pasting data? Yes. Are we going to be able to automate that? Certainly, if it's even a different aspect of the system, right? And then you build on top of that, you know, with things like machine learning. How can we leverage a system to detect when there's additional opportunities for automation that we might not have seen? Again, right, I'm just standing here talking to you today, but certainly, you know, 300 systems, there are going to be people all over the place who are using different systems for purposes that we don't realize, right? How can machine learning, how can artificial intelligence help us to identify those and optimize things and make a better user experience faster? And really, another thing I would say about you know, our research into AI is, you know, there are companies out there that provide an AI platform for the government in DoD space, but is that the right answer for me? You know, certainly chatbots, AI chatbots are great, right? Do we want to have that capability? Yes, right? Is there opportunities in our data cleansing? Most likely yes as well. But do we want to develop a artificial intelligence platform that is inherent within our capability, or do we want to actually have several and let different vendors that are proposing those different solution sets in the different parts of our system that are required? Do we want to just have multiple, AI type capabilities, machine learning in the areas where those vendors are best at providing that solution, right? And where would we need to develop our own product? All right, no questions so far? Anything? All right. So another thing, I kind of alluded to this with commercial carriers, right? Content management is going to be another huge portion of our effort, right? With the goal of financial auditability, one of the things I hear from our auditors is, you have to be able to justify a transaction. And so if you can't prove that something ever arrived because the guy dropped it off and he didn't care because he gets paid by the government either way, right? He just leaves, right? If we don't get a receipt, then you can't prove that you spent that money on a good quality shipment. And so we are going to have a robust content management system that is able to take all of that information in, all of the documents, all of the different systems, all the records that we're required by law to keep, and also scan those documents and process that out. And really, again, this probably won't be a surprise to anybody here. As we see the capabilities of dedicated content management products, it seems like there's really no way to avoid that. Like, that's something that's absolutely desirable for our solution to be able to get that data out of those files, get those files stored, metadata, tagging, and all of the information for our needs. All right, moving over to identity management, zero trust, right? Obviously, zero trust, big buzzword, pretty exciting. I don't know if you guys know that. The government, we're going to be zero trusty, right? Executive orders, they're all out there. But what does that mean in practice, right? Again, and you can see where for a group of people that's trying to integrate up to 300 systems, up to 36,000 users at 1,100 sites, including foreign nationals, or even Americans who don't have a CAT card, who don't have any affiliation really with the government at all, other than the fact that they're commercial freight providers, right? This is going to be a complicated task, not only to manage their access, but to give them access to begin with, right? And when you add on to that the fact that consolidated movements, that we're anticipating this being considered a national security system and having that IL5 requirement that we discussed, right? There's additional gates of access that both the identity provider, identity solution, identity transaction, right, is going to have to traverse, as well as the data that those folks are trying to input into the system. And so, again, we believe that probably leveraging a internal tool is not necessarily going to be sufficient. Most of the internal tools depend on having a EDI/PI in your pocket, right? But talking with the DISA team even here, this is a problem that they also recognize and that they're working on. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of solutions we can use. And then at the same time, so if I'm saying a standalone product may be required or a standalone solution, it still also has to integrate fully with the government system. And again, what are the implications of trying to straddle that line of that essentially commercial, maybe IL2 level, and that IL5 level of transaction? How does that apply to the users? How will we manage that? Again, I think that this is all possible, but it's a big project. So moving over to some more fun stuff, right? User interface. This one is near and dear to my heart because I am a human and I use technology sometimes, right? So I know that when I log in on Wednesday to do my timesheet, right, I'm going to use the same system as when I started as a government civilian. Right? It's pretty sweet, right? I know all the codes, right? If I want to take sick leave, how to put in the sick leave. But is that really the best way to do things, right? Is good enough, again, if I'm convincing 36,000 people to migrate from one or multiple old systems to a new system, is it good enough to say, hey, this is technically functional and we have a whole training manual that's going to tell you how to use it, so it's totally fine? No, right? One of the things that the government has done poorly and we're going to fix is really leveraging technology, an agility layer Whether or not a specific agility layer products are required is actually dependent on the underlying software solution that's going to be proposed by integrators. It's a really interesting question that, frankly, I could talk about the whole day. Frankly, I think the sponsor, whose name is all over the doors, would love to talk about all day. I'm just saying. But I'm trying to see how far I can push the contracting officer before I get the hook, right? But this is. But yeah, so how can we integrate all of these solutions, right? How can we make everything appear as a single pane of glass, right? If we leverage an agility layer product and there's a legacy system that's only partially covered, should I pay our implementation contract to actually develop a user interface so that the user of that legacy system can do all of their work through our interface and simply API it back to the system where they have capabilities that are out of scope, right? That's an interesting line to walk because it goes outside of the scope of our mission, right? And as Lance, or as Mr. Littlekin here mentioned, our program manager's not here to call me out on it, right? But I think that there are some real gains to be made by going a little bit beyond the strict scope of the transportation management system in this area, because if you can get a dramatically better user interface that integrates seamlessly with legacy programs as necessary, that gives you a great way to help people make that transition to a new system. And the same thing is going to be true for our internal products, right? So there's going to be that identity management solution. There's going to be cybersecurity tools, right? That's on a different slide, obviously. But we have all these other products, but should we be forcing our internal folks, our super users, to be logging into 10 different portals? Or should we be integrating everything into one user experience, user interface that is modern and functional? And obviously, we believe the answer to that is yes. So really, really closely aligned to that, right, is system performance and user experience, right? So fit for use, fit for purpose, right? So are we getting enough resources so that the system reacts well? And this is something, frankly, that we've done a lot of research on and had a lot of discussions on the back end. For people who are interested and have seen our draft solicitations, right? There's been functional requirements, and we've been pressed by industry to define, well, what's a simple query? What's a complex query? And it's tough, right, to say, but I think at the end of the day, the result is pretty simple. If our user is running a query and they know that they're querying an entire year's worth of transactional data or an entire year's worth of shipments, and the report takes a minute to generate, they probably think like, oh yeah, it's pretty good. I got my report. If it takes 10 minutes or 15 minutes, then that's bad, right? Nobody wants to wait. Again, it's 2024, right? So no one wants to wait several minutes to have a report generated. And again, there's part of that is going to be expectations management, but what can we get, right? How far can we push system performance in the cloud? How can we make the system scale so that the users get a great user experience, the best that they can ask for, right? And our intent here is that we also need to be monitoring that. And so if somebody, because people are not going to always be happy, right? So there are products that can be used to monitor clients, monitor latency, and all of those things are going to be relevant. Again, very much on the border of the scope for a transportation management system, but required in order to deliver a user experience and functionality out to customers around the world. So the next thing we have here is configuration and change management, right? So this is one thing that is a little scary, right? Because normally on programs, right, that have not always had a rigorous change management program, you're allowed to kind of make some changes. You're allowed to get things done. But certainly on a program of this scale, we're expecting to have a rigorous configuration, change, service management process, whichever term resonates with you. We have requirements that say that the system needs to support automated configuration management. And what we're really meaning is all of those changes should be tracked in an automatic fashion. Approvals workflows. Again, there are many commercial tools that can provide this type of capability, and we definitely also anticipate that those are going to be a part of the solution, right? Talking back to the agility layer, right? So there's different solutions that would provide a integrated user experience, right? And not all of them, as I understand it, have what you would consider a dedicated configuration management tool, right? There are multiple ERPs, and not all of them have what you'd consider like a really good dedicated configuration management tool. And so this is a really great example of something that we need, and we know that there's going to be options available. But for me, in a pre-acquisition state, I'm really interested in seeing how proposals are put together that really show, okay, well, you're going to get this tool here, you're going to get this tool here, and this is where it's all going to wrap together. And of course, my configuration manager, is anticipating it being a significant workload every time we do an engagement with an additional integration, every time we do an additional process that's being pulled into the JTMS, whether it's a commercial shipping, all of those are going to have to run through a tracked process so that we know exactly what the system is capable of doing, what it's been designed to do, and it'll allow us to assess the system, as we move forward. Any questions? No? All right. Well, security and accreditation, right? So for a new system, this is going to be another big issue. Again, I probably don't need to even say this slide, right? I had a person ask me once, you put security and accreditation kind of low in your deck. Shouldn't you think it'd be a higher priority? And I said, people have to do it, right? So this is going to be a system that has data for shipment of cargo and goods all across the world, military moves, passenger travel, personally identifiable information, right? So even though I have it here as area of interest 11, right? Make no mistake that we are anticipating a very robust cybersecurity solution as a component of our system, right? There are commercial offerings. There are also, again, through the DISA offerings, right, for their cybersecurity service provider. It will be interesting to see who feels that certain capabilities within DISA may be sufficient for analytics, for intrusion detection, for monitoring, and who thinks that supplemental tools are going to be required to meet our coverage and our space where we're going to be operating. And again, when you consider things as simple as those daggone IL2 or no identity management, like do we have to have a standalone capability to monitor security all the way down to endpoints, or is that something that we can inherit through part of our process? As I mentioned before, anticipating the system be built to the full NSS overlay categorization specifications, right? So earlier in our acquisition, there were some questions about our categorization as a defense business system rather than a national security system. But when you are actually in EMAS or you are putting together an accreditation package, those are not exclusive options, right? You can definitely be a defense business system and apply that national security overlay to your controls. And that is exactly what we're intending to do and meet that requirement. Disconnected operations, this is one that's really interesting, right? If you ask a logistician what they want to retain in terms of capability when they get disconnected from the internet, they're going to give you a very simple answer, which is everything. But cloud and disconnected operations, there's got to be a limit, right? If there's no limit, then yes, maybe you have something in a cloud host, but you would have to mirror 100% of that capability down to a server, at which point, the benefit of that cloud is largely mitigated, right? So one of the things that we are looking at is exactly what capabilities need to be retained when that person disconnects from the internet. That could include if you're operating a shipping warehouse, right? You wake up in the morning and the internet went out, right? Somebody put a new billboard in the Walmart outside of DISA's buildings in Columbus, Ohio, and severed a main fiber trunk. Not that that's ever happened, right? But that Walmart parking lot, I'm just saying. But I'm trying. It's a true story. So, people, you never know when you're going to lose access to network connectivity. And again, right here in San Diego, that would probably be pretty difficult, right? But for some of our users who are overseas or at sea or just in a remote port, they could wake up any day and not have that. So they are going to have a minimal capability that they require, right? Are they going to get real-time shipping updates when they're not connected to the internet? No, because that's what real-time means, right? But where between that and guys who are still having to print out a stack of files the night before, where can we achieve that balance? So I've got 2 more slides, guys. This one's support and continuity of operations. Again, this kind of goes to the, I think the traditional troubleshooter that I'm sure a lot of people in this audience have had experience. If everything is in the cloud and you have a continuity of operations, what does that look like? Do you really trust things that you can't touch, right? Is there ever a requirement for us to have kind of our own backup, our own continuity support capability? This is still up in the air. And then, also what I've got here, we talk about recovery point and recovery time. If you look at a traditional recovery time objective, right? What is that? That's based on someone coming into the office, firing up servers, firing up your backup equipment and getting that system back online. But if this is a cloud, right, if we're leveraging a main cloud service provider, then what's a reasonable time to expect for recovery? I think we shortened our requirement from something on the order, it said like a week, for recovery point. And I think we shortened that to like 15 minutes, right? So we'll see, hey, what do vendors think of that, right? But really, I appreciate that if I'm giving you this presentation, if I'm typing into the computer, there's going to be data lost if there's a disconnection. But how fast is that data cached up into the cloud? This is really part of where that advantage comes in, right? So if we're not getting, sub-hour recovery after a failure, then are we getting that full advantage of that cloud? Did we buy the right level of service from that vendor? And then my last slide, Agile versus waterfall. Agile, again, it's a real thing, right? But it's also a buzzword, right? And so if we have, as I've kind of laid out in this slide deck, right, there are things that have to come first, right? We are not going to be able to process a Air Force financial transaction for a shipment until we have integrated with the Air Force financial transaction system. And so the question is, how can we put together an execution timeline? How can we be as agile as possible while still realizing that there are going to be both technical, literal, this has to come first operations, and we're going to have to stop and do an ATO package. We're going to have to do DOT&E test report because we're at BCAT 1 Defense Business System. There's no way we're going to be able to avoid some waterfalls both in that administrative and in the technical way. But how do we structure and plan for a program that has the most agile fielding possible? So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Mr. Litigant to close it up.
Thanks, Randall. So as you can see, we have a big task in front of us, and we're excited to continue to engage with industry and see what kind of innovative ideas they're going to bring to the table in terms of the implementation contracts. So as most of you may be interested in, over the past 12 months, we've had a lot of engagements with industry. Most of you likely are familiar with that or have participated in those sessions. As you can see, we had multiple RFIs that have went out. We had Industry Day in the fall of 22. We had Reverse Industry Day out in Virginia, where we had vendors come in and provide a two-way dialogue of some of the capabilities they're bringing to the table and allow them to ask us questions. And then we held a pre-solicitation conference in October of 2023. We've released multiple iterations of the draft solicitation, received industry feedback on the performance work statement and other contractual documentation. And the feedback that we have consistently gotten from industry is that they're impressed with the level of engagement that the team has had with them in kind of working through this procurement process. So myself and Mr. Al Albers, the PM, We went up to the Pentagon a week and a half ago when we briefed the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Acquisition and the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Sustainment on the intent to release the solicitation. You all may have likely seen the pre-solicitation notice get posted within the last, 2 weeks, Jane-Ann? Yeah, last week, that the solicitation will be coming out here shortly. Our intent is to go to Honorable LaPlante, who's the MDA, in middle of March. We have that scheduled for 13 March, where we'll request his approval of the ACT strategy, and then that effectively allows us to release the solicitation to industry. Again, the contract award is tentatively set for the second quarter of 25, and our goal is to get the solicitation out by the end of the second quarter of 24. And then again, this is just the notional future state. We've highlighted some warfighting effects that we anticipate being key enablers as a result of the JTMS implementation, integrated financial management, elimination of a lot of swivel chair processes. A lot of our as-is findings have been, the services are doing things on whiteboards and with Post-it notes and things like that when they should be automating those things, and this is the opportunity to try and get after some of that stuff. Again, maximize nodal throughput, in-transit visibility. Those are all big capabilities that we're looking to enable through the implementation of this JTMS program. And then here's the notional JTMS pre-award capability roadmap. And I will highlight that we do have another contract effort that's going to be released here shortly for change management. I talked about the importance of change management, so we're procuring a commercial contract for change management support. We're expecting that solicitation to be released within probably the next 60 days with an award around the third or fourth quarter of 24. So we're excited to get that one out on the street as well. Looking forward to seeing what kind of industry feedback we get there. And again, here you can see that as a defense business system, there's a lot of very bureaucratic processes we need to follow. A lot of times it doesn't enable the use of Agile and some other more rapid capability development. We're looking to delegate the authority from the MDA down to our component acquisition executive who sits in U.S. Transcom. It's Mr. Ken Brennan. So that way, for those limited deployment capability releases, we don't have to go to Honorable LaPlante because it's a challenge getting on his calendar. He's quite busy. So with that being said, this is, again, a high-level schedule. That brings us to the end of the session here. We wanted to have some time for some questions if anybody had any. I would also note that we have a booth downstairs in the exhibit hall, so look us up. Randall and I will be heading down there after the briefing if somebody wants to ask questions. If somebody wants to ask questions that they don't want to ask in the session here. So with that being said, I appreciate AFCIA and allowing us to come and speak. I appreciate you all coming out and listening, and we look forward to continuing to work with all of you.
Good morning, Bernard Chaffan, McTissa. You mentioned continuity of operations in one of your slides, so I was wondering if you'd looked at things like, the movie Grid Down, Power Up discusses the possibility if we had conflict, us being completely without power for months. Another possibility if we had conflict is the adversary taking out our GPS system. So with some of these things, do you have ways to work around that? No electricity, EV vehicles can't move, no GPS, perhaps things can't navigate.
You got to answer in the mic.
So I think certainly, right, there's a level of scenario that renders, right, communications equipment non-functional, right? But again, as we look at that disconnected operating scenario, I think the key is going to be the levels of degradation that are most likely expected and what the result of that is going to be. For example, there's a IBIS, right, a naval bidding system that allows carriers to put in rates, right? So if you think about that transactional rate data for commercial sea lift, then if that was to become unavailable, what would the net result of that be? And in this case, right, just making up hypothetical options, right? So in one, you could say, well, we're just going to call them on the phone and tell them that we're the government and we'll pay them, right? And you get ripped off, but they're shipping stuff despite no information. Hey, sorry, pardon my. But there's other options, right? Where if there is a limited deployment, maybe during that period of outage, people are simply not booking new freight orders, right? Because that's not a process where that individual user is there 24/7. So maybe there's a level of backlog that they can support, or maybe they're just busy, right? And it's not going to be that big of a deal. And again, with 300 systems, it's really difficult to say. So certainly, like to your point about like inability to use electronic equipment, right? That is not, I think, something that we're really planning for. I mean, I'm going to knock on wood, right? But more likely would be that telecommunications disruption. And so, again, even then, right? If you're at an island and there's a commercial military vessel, if that island gets disconnected, ultimately the ways that you communicate out of there are going to be limited, right? And so, Transportation Command and the DoD in general, right? They have other alternatives for comms, but how does that then get back to the cloud infrastructure? And that's where I think options like DISA's JWCC that go through, let's say, the cloud access point may give a vehicle for a military comm to be used as a backhaul for a commercial cloud. But again, this is all very, very hypothetical. And that's, in fact, it's one of the reasons it's kind of lower on my side, because that is definitely so complicated of a nut to crack, and there's so many scenarios that it's difficult to assess, really, right? And again, so we're at the very beginning stages of this journey of this program, and so it's tough.
All right, any other questions? All right, nothing heard. I did want to mention that we also have our contracting team here as well. So any contracting questions, they'll be at the booth, and you guys can come and ask those also. So again, appreciate your time. Hope you have a great rest of the conference, and thanks.